Welcome to part 2 of pilgrimage as religious tradition. Last week we discussed the general characteristics of a pilgrimage and the 2 sites of renowned Christian pilgrimage. Today we're going to talk about pilgrimage in other religious traditions. And let me say at the outset that I'm not going to go into the dogmas and doctrines of these other faiths. That's something that the Hinkles do much better than I. Instead, I'm going to focus on the narrow topic of whether and how these religions accommodate pilgrims. And let me say that I got so carried away with what I was learning that I filled up the allotted time for this forum without being able to include Hinduism. But do not think its absence means that there are not places and times of Hindu pilgrimage. So what do you think when you hear the word pilgrim? If you are an American child in elementary school, you probably think of someone who looks like this, and you know the traditional pilgrim, the hat and the buckled shoes. Okay.
There it is.
There we go.
Yeah.
So, if you have a sense of Christian history, you might think the Middle Ages, where the pilgrimage tradition was strong, and the pilgrims looked like the next slide. Or if you are a travel agent today, you think in terms of great number of people visiting sites that are holy. What we're going to do this morning is expand our visual conception of what a pilgrim looks like. So the next slide had a crowd of people, and then this slide has a lot of pilgrims from other religious faiths and the different things that they wear as part of their pilgrimage. But we're going to start with the Jewish faith. There are several places in the Old Testament where Jews are told to make an aliyah, or going up to the temple in Jerusalem. These can be considered pilgrimages. The first of these merely states the requirements. Exodus 23:17. 3 times in the year, all your males shall appear before the Lord God. The second explains the benefits of the going up. Exodus 34:23-24. 3 times in the year, all your males shall appear before the Lord God, the God of Israel. For I will cast out nations before you and enlarge your borders. No one shall covet your land when you go up to appear before the Lord your God 3 times a year. Deuteronomy provides more detail about when the 3 goings up shall occur and what shall happen. 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the Lord your God at the place that he will choose, at the festival of the unleavened bread, at the festival of weeks, and at the festival of booths. They shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. All shall give as they are able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God that he has given you. And 2 Chronicles documents that King Solomon made these holy observances. Then Solomon offered up burnt offerings to the Lord on the altar of the Lord that he had built in front of the vestibule, as the duty of each day required, offering to the commandments of Moses for the Sabbaths, for the new moons, and the 3 annual festivals, the festival of unleavened bread, the festival of weeks, and the festival of booths. Also, there are 15 psalms, Psalm 120 to 134, considered pilgrimage songs or songs of ascent that were sung by Hebrew pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem, or possibly while ascending Mount Zion or the steps of the temple. Here is the beginning of Psalm 122. I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. Our feet shall stand within thy gates, O Jerusalem. I think most of us are familiar with the festival of unleavened bread or Passover. Shavuot, or the festival of weeks or Pentecost, occurs 7 weeks after Passover, so mid-May to mid-June, depending on the year. And it marks the wheat harvest, but also the anniversary of Moses receiving the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. Sukkot, the festival of booths, is also known as the Feast of Tabernacles or Feast of Shelters, or Feast of Ingathering, and occurs late September and late October. It has a double purpose in celebrating the end of the harvest, and as the book of Leviticus makes clear, notes the dependence of the people of Israel on the will of God. I'm going to see. I don't know if this is going to work, but if I hold this up, you can see this is a little booth that was made that they use at this Sukkot festival. Sukkot means booth or tabernacle, a walled structure covered with plant material such as palm leaves. It is the name of the temporary dwelling in which farmers would live during harvest, but it's also a reminder of the type of shelter the Jews had in their 40 years in the desert. The biblical passages were apparently not viewed as mandatory, requiring aliyah 3 times a year, but as meaning that on these occasions it was meritorious to make the pilgrimage and to offer up sacrifices. Remember, none shall appear empty-handed. People frequently traveled in community with their neighbors, built encampments in and around Jerusalem, participated in common festival meals, and engaged in the study of the Torah. And although the biblical language said that the male should do this, frequently whole families made the journey together. During the Second Temple period, hundreds of thousands of pilgrims from within Israel and elsewhere would go to Jerusalem. The pilgrimage affected the life of every Jew who might have to prepare for the occasion, and the journey and the accompanying sacrifices involved a not inconsiderable financial outlay. These festivals were all multi-day events, and many of the new trends in Jewish spiritual life were discussed and then disseminated as the pilgrims returned home. Josephus, the Roman Jewish historian, noted such pilgrimages strengthened the consciousness of national and social solidarity. As a result of this sensitivity, he reports, disorders and revolts frequently occurred in Jerusalem during the pilgrimage festivals. For just a minute, think about the events of Holy Week in this context. Pilgrimages to Jerusalem continued after the destruction of the temple. However, the joy that previously characterized these events was now combined with sorrow. When the pilgrims encountered the site of the ruined sanctuary, they tore their garments as a sign of mourning and recited the verse from Isaiah. Our holy and beautiful house, where our fathers praised thee, is burned with fire, and all our pleasant things are laid waste. These pilgrimages continued throughout the Middle Ages, although on many occasions the Jewish pilgrims were subject to taxes and discriminatory regulations which were enacted against them by the Christian or Muslim overlords of the holy places. There is also contemporaneous evidence that after the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, Jews would travel to Rome as a pilgrimage, I think you could say, to visit locations that highlighted Jewish culture, such as you see here on the Arch of Titus, which depicted the spoils of Jerusalem, and the Temple of Peace, which looted Jewish temple objects. Today, the western wall of the temple in Jerusalem is the focus of pilgrimage and prayer. I think it is fair to say that most people, when asked to identify a religious pilgrimage tradition, will think of the Islamic Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of the Islamic faith, and that is the specific pilgrimage tradition that I will discuss this morning. Here I need to confess my ignorance because as I learned when researching this topic, the Hajj or pilgrimage to Mecca is not the only pilgrimage important to Muslims. In fact, the vast majority of the world's Muslims go on pilgrimage to places other than Mecca. And although I was certainly aware that there were different denominations of Islam, Sunni and Shiite and Sufi for starters, I never stopped to think that these denominations might well have different holy places to which they would make pilgrimage. A book that was useful to me in discovering these differences is Pilgrimage in Islam, Traditional and Modern Practices by Sophia Rose Arjana. She writes, Muslim pilgrims travel to a wide variety of places. Countless holy sites, mazarat, graves, tomb complexes, mosques, shrines, mountaintops, springs, and gardens can be found across the world in large cities like Mashhad, small villages in Turkey, trade outposts in the deserts of Samarkand, African metropolises like Fez and the forests of Bosnia. All of these places are located within an Islamic universe that is present with the spirit of Allah and holds the promise of barakat, the blessings that pilgrims seek. Many Islamic pilgrimages are centered on the dead. One of the animating motivations for such pilgrimages is to help the dead in their transition. There is a vast set of Muslim traditions that suggest that the dead are able to hear the living. Rituals at such sites as tombs or graves, or even at places associated with events in the life of a holy person, frequently include the practice of saying tawqid, reminding or instructing the deceased of the basics of the religion so he will know how to answer when the angels of destruction interrogate him. Despite the widespread practice of Islamic pilgrimage to these many sites, some Orthodox Islamic theologians continue to raise questions about the religious validity of pilgrimage outside the Hajj. Some of these new movements are identified as bid'ah, innovation, and their followers as kafir, unbelievers. So other than pointing out the existence of these other traditions and holy places within the religion of Islam, I am going to leave them aside and discuss only the Hajj. It is expected that a Muslim will make the Hajj at least once in his life. The Hajj is unlike the Christian pilgrimages we discussed and more like the Jewish pilgrimages in that it occurs at a specific time. There is a shorter pilgrimage to Mecca known as the Umrah that forms part of the Hajj, but which can be performed by itself at any time of the year, but it is not considered a substitute or replacement for the Hajj obligation. The Hajj is a multi-day event with a series of prescribed practices and rituals. You may recall from last week that one of the prompts for my research into religious pilgrimages was thinking about how much planning needs to go into a multi-day event with many, many individuals engaging in ritual practices simultaneously. In 2019, nearly 2.5 million people traveled to Mecca for the event. You may have read news accounts in June describing how Saudi Arabia was debating whether the 2020 Hajj should be canceled because of the pandemic. The last cancellation of the Hajj had occurred in 1798 when Napoleon's military campaign in Egypt and Syria disrupted the route to Mecca. In late June, the King's Ministry of Hajj and Umrah eventually announced that this year the Hajj, scheduled for late July and ending just last Sunday, would be drastically limited, probably to no more than 10,000 people, later 1,000, who are already in the kingdom, but would include nationalities beyond the Saudis. The announcement did not explain how pilgrims would be chosen. This limitation is a big deal for Saudi Arabia, since that country promotes its identity as the leading Muslim country and custodian of the holy sites of Mecca and Medina. To get an idea of how important the Hajj is to Saudi Arabia's image, you should know that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030 plan includes efforts to expand the Hajj, the backbone of the type of Islamic tourism that he is trying to promote. It includes expansion of the mosques, a new airport, a new metro system to transport pilgrims, and a relaxation of the terms of pilgrim visas to allow them to travel elsewhere in the kingdom. When Muslims decide to go on Hajj, they recite the Talbiyah, which is repeated throughout the preparations. They also enter into a state of ritual purity. At the point of entry, there is an oath of intention, ablution, and shaving of beards and head. Although pilgrims may have worn special clothing traveling to Mecca, there is ritual clothing, 2 white seamless cloths that are donned after the purification as the first of the 10 steps of the Hajj. The other rituals include circle the Kaaba 7 times in an anti-clockwise direction. The Kaaba is believed to have been founded by Adam and rebuilt by Abraham or Ishmael. In one eastern corner of the Kaaba is a black stone from a meteorite said to be used by Adam. Running between 2 small hills of Safa and Marwa, an act repeated 7 times and based on actions of Hagar. In the past, this was performed outdoors, but now occurs in an air-conditioned marble-paved corridor. Drinking from a sacred well, travel to the valley of Mina and to Mount Arafat to pray for forgiveness, overnight as Muzdalifah, and gathering pebbles. These are the accommodations that they make for the pilgrims, and gathering pebbles. At Mina, you throw the 7 pebbles at the largest of 3 stones representing the temptations of Satan. 2 more days, throw more pebbles, animal sacrifice, and then return to Mecca for the final 7 circuits around the Kaaba. Through the days, there are prayers, sermons, and lessons. Maintaining a state of purity during the Hajj is very important because the places have a particularly strong divine presence. Acts that violate this and require animal sacrifice include cutting nails, using perfume, sexual activity, hunting, or arguing. In the medieval period, there were eunuchs who were charged with making sure men and women did not pollute each other even by touching hands during the Hajj. Although the prescribed rituals of Hajj and Umrah are widely known to scholars of Islam, there is a wide array of lesser-known traditions that also take place near Mecca and Medina, including many that reflect particular liturgical practices and rituals of the varying sects of Islam. Many of these traditions are not widely known and are practiced in secret. Pilgrims may also choose to visit the mosque in Medina as part of their pilgrimage. Think for a minute of the logistical preparations, especially in a year of 2 million pilgrims. Accommodations for the pilgrims, often by country, so announcements can be made in specific languages. Food and drink, barbers for the ritual shavings, baths and fountains for the ablution, transportation between accommodation and worship sites, animals for sacrifice, and medical and burial care. Some number who come for Hajj do so because they are dying, and this is their last chance to fulfill this religious requirement. Some die in the course of their journey, and there have been instances of stampedes occurring and people being crushed and dying as well. Among the changes for the Hajj this year, besides limiting the numbers of pilgrims, pilgrims were required to be between the ages of 20 and 50 and in good health. What the next slide would have showed is the 2 pictures of Hajj from last year and from this year and how the differences in the numbers you can see there. They had to be between 20 and 50 and in good health. They had to wear face masks and only drink holy water from the Zamzam well in Mecca that had been prepackaged in plastic bottles. The pebbles for casting away evil that were usually picked up along Hajj routes were instead sterilized and bagged and distributed to the pilgrims. Pilgrims were also brought their own prayer rugs and were required to pray at a distance from one another rather than packed shoulder to shoulder, and no foreign media was allowed to observe. When pilgrims return to their homes, they frequently mark their homes in some ways to show that they have made the Hajj. I have spent so much time on Judaism and Islam that I'm now going to give you just a taste of 2 other pilgrimage traditions. Buddhism. Last week, I intimated that Webster's second definition of pilgrimage, the course of life on earth, was a good description of how many Buddhists regard life as a journey to discover truth and enlightenment. Pilgrimage is an important Buddhist practice because it helps to express feelings of devotion and creates a relationship with the historical figures associated with the pilgrimage site. And there are many pilgrimage sites in the Buddhist tradition. One could say that Buddhism is less a religion and more a way of living, and I have met individuals of a number of faiths who identify themselves as a Buddhist in addition to their primary religious identification. The Dalai Lama himself has written, the actual path on which the individual travels is progressively deepening knowledge and the realization of emptiness. Buddhists practice worship, which involves religious acts of praise, honor, and devotion, usually toward a deity or other figure worthy of this degree of respect, such as the Buddha. They do not believe he was a god, but they worship him as a form of respect. The four major sites of Buddhist pilgrimage identified by the Buddha himself are Lumbini, the birthplace of the Buddha in Nepal; Bodh Gaya, the most important site as it houses the tree where Prince Siddhartha attained enlightenment and became known as the Buddha; Sarnath, where he delivered his first sermon; and Kushinagara, where he passed away and attained parinirvana. Additionally, later texts by his followers mention 4 other sites where a miraculous event is reported to have occurred, completing the list of the 8 great places: Shravasti, Ragir, Sankasa, and Vaishali. But I'm not going to talk about any of these. Instead, I'm going to talk about the Shikoko pilgrimage in Japan, which is known as the Way of 88 Temples. I chose this particular pilgrimage because the travel aspect of making a pilgrimage along about 800 miles, I thought paralleled the way of Santiago de Compostela, which I wrote about in the July Inspire. Besides, I found a delightful memoir called The Way of the 88 Temples. By foot, the journey takes between 45 and 60 days. However, many pilgrims make the journey by bike, car, bus, or other means of transportation, all considered equally valid. Although there is a traditional starting place for the circuit, it is not required, and some pilgrims consider it lucky to do the circuit in reverse order from the traditional way. The Henryumichi is one of the oldest and most famous pilgrimages in Japan, consisting of a circuit of 88 temples around the perimeter of Shikoko, the smallest of Japan's main islands. In the 1960s, about 15,000 henro or pilgrims performed the pilgrimage annually. Today, there are about 150,000 pilgrims a year. Although the religion may not play a significant role in the lives of many Japanese, one scholar has written that the pilgrimage provides a reaffirmation of their social and cultural identity and a way of consolidating the religious outlooks that underpin their existence. The pilgrimage route goes through forests and lush rural areas and along the sea and among the mountains. But it also goes through heavily urbanized areas. And the main complaint that pilgrims have is about the amount of time spent in traffic-heavy highways and in long, dark tunnels. The route supposedly follows in the footsteps of Kobo Daishi, the 9th century ascetic who founded the Shingon Buddhist sect. Each of the 88 temples has a statue of him, and he is said to accompany each pilgrim, which is why they carry a walking stick or staff with the words, "Homage to Kobo Daishi, we too, pilgrims together." In addition to the walking stick, the pilgrim can be identified by a white shirt, robe, or vest, and a conical hat, and in some cases, a decorative stole. They also carry a book in which each temple will stamp a seal as a testament to their presence. At each temple, the pilgrim performs ablutions, rings a bell, and enters to say the traditional prayers. Each pilgrim carries name tags and deposits them in bins in the temple. These paper slips contain written prayers along with a sketch of Kobo Daishi and are eventually burned in a special ceremony. The name slip is white if you have been to that temple fewer than 5 times. A green slip means that the pilgrim has made 5 or 6 circuits, and red designates 7 to 24 pilgrimages. From 25 to 49 circuits, your name slip is silver and gold after 50. Pilgrims may also carry prayer beads, incense sticks, and coins to use as offerings. They may also carry a book of sutra, the sayings of the original Buddha. Just a minute, my cat
Knocked it over.
knocked over some papers, and I wanted to try to show you a picture of what the pilgrim looks like. I don't know if you can see this, with the conical hat and the white shirt.
Take it up,
and the
move it
skull.
up.
Move it up.
Move it up.
Move it up. Oh, here, well, there's one picture of him.
Yeah.
Okay. Before I close, I want to touch on a final pilgrim that is part of a lesser known religion with a strong cultural component. It is oriented towards the same type of self-discovery that may be involved in other pilgrimages. There, that's a good picture of the pilgrims. I was born a Sullivan, and although I have more German ancestry than Irish, culturally I have always identified with the Irish. I wear green on St. Patrick's Day. I own several albums by the Clancy Brothers and the Chieftains. I saw Riverdance, and I have even been known to drink green beer. I am sure many of you have similar cultural identifications. Until recently, however, many African Americans have not been able to identify their ethnic and cultural origins with any degree of certainty. New DNA technologies that are widely available to consumers are helping them to fill in this gap in their origin stories. As I was working on this forum, I came across a pilgrimage known as the Sogbo. It is an annual festival in honor of the Yoruba goddess Ison. This indigenous African faith, sometimes called Orisa devotion, was first carried to the Americas as part of the transatlantic slave trade, where it spread and evolved. It is most widely practiced in the Caribbean and Brazil. In the US, it was driven underground, but is now growing in popularity in African American and Afro-Cuban neighborhoods. The last remaining Yoruba sacred grove is in Nigeria and is now considered a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is what UNESCO has to say about the place. The dense forest of the Osun Sacred Grove on the outskirts of the city of Osogbo is one of the last remnants of primary high forest in southern Nigeria. Regarded as the abode of the goddess of fertility Osun, one of the pantheon of Yoruba gods, the landscape of the grove and its meandering river is dotted with sanctuaries and shrines, sculptures and artworks in honor of Osun and other deities. The sacred grove, which is now seen as a symbol of identity for all Yoruba people, is probably the last in Yoruba culture. It testifies to the once widespread practice of establishing sacred groves outside all settlements. Tens of thousands of pilgrims from around the world are attracted to this two-week festival in late August. The Osuna Sogbo Festival is believed to have a history of more than 700 years. Historically, an ancestral occurrence led to the celebration of this festival. A group of migrating people settled on the bank of Osun River to save themselves from famine. At the riverside, Osun the goddess appeared from the water to lead people to the present Osogbo town. The goddess promised to protect all the group and bring them prosperity in return for an annual sacrifice to her. The group accepted the proposition. Today, the annual sacrifice to the Ison River goddess is what is still celebrated as the Osun Osogbo Festival. The festival starts with the traditional cleansing of the town called the Iwu-Popo, which is followed in 3 days by the lighting of a 500-year-old 16-point lamp, whose name I won't even attempt. You can see it there. The festival is an appreciation of beauty in all parts of life, most particularly the arts. The festival includes drumming, dancing, musical performances, wearing of elaborate costumes, speaking the Yoruba language, and recitation of praise poetry. The festival is of immense benefit to the tourism sector of Nigeria, but also serves as a strong unifying factor in the area, irrespective of the differences in the social, economic, religious, and political convictions of the people in the area, who all come together to celebrate the goddess. Among those attending the festival are citizens of the US, some of whom have been initiated as priestesses to the goddess Osuna. One of these new young priestesses has said, "There is no power in not knowing who you are, where you come from. Coming here, I am taking back that power. I am taking back that identity." I hope that my two forums on pilgrimage as a religious tradition have contributed to your awareness of the many different types of people who go on pilgrimage, the many places they journey to, and the kinds of liturgical rituals and practices and prayers in which they engage. However, there is one common factor, I think, in all pilgrimages, and that is the basic human desire to forge a closer connection to the ultimate reality, in whatever way that pilgrim might define his God. Last week, we talked about places of pilgrimage that we all had visited. Today, as we continue to stay in home lockdown mode, let's travel in our imagination. If you could visit any place as a pilgrimage, where would you go? What would you hope to find yourself? Why do you think this particular place would make you feel closer to God? Where would that be? Thoughts?
You're saying going anywhere wouldn't have to be one of these traditional pilgrimage
No,
places.
no. I mean, if I could, magically transport myself, I am a big fan of medieval cathedrals. I feel very close to God in them. And although I've been to about a dozen of them, there are another dozen or so that I haven't been to. So I would probably continue my pilgrimage to the various great medieval cathedrals of Western Europe.
Pat, can women go to the Hajj?
Yes.
Because I didn't see any, that's why I was wondering. Okay.
Yeah, but they're separated.
Oh, yeah, right.
And, none of the things that I read, there was one book of essays from Hajj travelers, and I didn't read all of the essays. I don't remember if there were any by women in it that probably would have gone into more description of the differences. But the fact that they had these eunuchs back in medieval times that kept them separated makes me think that they've been a part of that tradition for some time.
I thought I saw some women when they had all those people with kind of togas on. Some women who had white, around their head,
Yeah, I'm trying to look at my pictures of my slides. That's the thing that the cat scattered.
It was like one of them was pushing a wheelchair.
Right.
And that one, the one you looked like a woman pushing in a wheelchair with the shawl on her head too.
Yes.
Well, Susie and Dennis could weigh in on this one, but I have never felt closer to God than when I'm skiing. And, I always, certainly when I'm with other people, when you're at the top of the mountain looking around, it's fine, but I always look to find time just to be by myself. I mean, that's it for me.
So you connect more in a natural setting than in one of these edifices.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a mix. I like the cathedral and the old churches, but I also like the nature part. So if I can get them together, that's great. When I went to Egypt, we were out in the desert looking at a temple, and all but 5 of us stayed and looked at the temple, and the others went out. So we couldn't hear them because of the sand dunes. And it was very, very spiritual, just being there in the absolute total quiet. It was amazing.
I know, ever since I first visited Yosemite back in 1948, I have felt that God lives in Yosemite. So
Yes. Yes, he does.
I want to thank Kat before I get cycled out of the meeting again. Thank you, Kat.
Okay.